My name is José Luis Diaz. I'm a field crops farm advisor here in Merced, Stanislaus, in São Joaquim County. And I guess originally the idea was for me to look at some pictures that people uh, would submit asking for a weed ID and management. However, we only had one picture. So what I did to try to share with you guys something interesting, I just put together a very, very basic presentation, just some basics about weed management in general, why is it important, how weed biology uh, will dictate the proper time and the proper weed management tools that you need to employ. And then at the end, I will share the one picture that we had for weed ID. So since I have just started, and I think most people in this call probably have never talked with me or met me before, I have just very briefly one slide talking about my background and the crops that I have been working with since I started my job here with University of California Cooperative and Extension. And again, very briefly, why it's important to worry or why it's important to have the proper management and to plan an effective wind management programs. What are the some of the weed control options that we have, and how do they apply for the different weed uh, types and life cycles and biology and morphologies. And since the idea was to take pictures and then submit and ask for identification, that's one of the most common ways that I have people have so far contacted me. I just put together very few slides on the best way to take pictures and things to consider when we do plan to take pictures and submit for us for ID. And when using herbicides, which is one of the most often commonly used with management tools, and it is very effective and cheap, and there are some of the basic principles that we need to consider. And also, like Teresa just mentioned, it's very important to think about integrated weed management and just think about herbicides as one additional tool in the toolbox and not the only tool. So before starting work here with the University of California, I just tried to put here a picture on the left. That's I got my PhD at the University of Florida, and I did work with integrated weed management in pastures and rangelands. And then I spent 1 year in Wisconsin, which I do not miss the winter in Wisconsin. And basically working with alfalfa, silage corn, and cool season grass. Also, always focusing integrated weed management. And so far, I have been mainly doing weed science related work with a bunch of different crops. I have a IR4 project with safflower. I have some herbicide trials in corn, as well as cotton and alfalfa. So why should we worry about weeds? And again, guys, I know that I'm on the very last presentation of the day, and I do apologize. I missed most of the presentations because I was actually preparing this talk. So I'm sorry if I'm being a little bit repetitive. But basically what I just wanted to mention for this slide is that beyond the problems that we have about weeds, normally people think that weeds only considering our major ag and horticultural systems. Uh, so weeds are problematic way beyond those most large areas. So they do not only are problematic because they compete with water nutrients, but they have a lots of other issues: reduce safety through obstructions, loss of aesthetic value, reduce biodiversity, adverse effects on ecosystem services. For example, many of the invasive weeds we believe that are some few, which some of the vegetation that contributes to the wildfires that we have, and as well as we have weeds that are hazards to human and animal health. Just to show you guys one example, I know that we had a talk about poisonous weeds, but fiddleneck and common groundsel are just two examples of poisonous weeds if you do have a livestock operation system uh, that is based on forages. So now, what are So yes, we do know that weeds are problematic, and it's our best interest to try to have a proper management on them. So which options do we have? So there are many different options, and I guess really uh, the choice of one or more than one really depends on what are the specifics of your production systems, what are the particularities of your problems, the weeds that you have. But ideally, like Teresa just mentioned, we want to always think about when we are developing our weed management program, we always need to think about how can we integrate it multiple different weed control tactics or strategies. And the other thing that will dictate which one that do we choose, and here is just a few examples, which one should we choose and the time that we should use it is knowing our weeds, so is being able to identify our weeds because the weeds are not all the weeds are not made equally. So which one of these should we choose? So this all is going to be dependent on the weeds that you have and being able to properly identify your weeds. So if you, and then I just put this few pictures. For example, if you want us to identify a specific weed and then you take a picture very far away or that is kind of blurry, that really that's not very helpful, and sometimes it's pretty much impossible to have the correct identification. And then I just put here one example of a nice close-up. Just
Turkey mowing.
hello. Oh, uh, all right. So some of the things that are considered important when you are taking pictures and submitting for identification. Close-up needs to be focused. The more you take, the more of the plants, the better, and especially if it has a different morphological features. If you can capture, that would be even better. For example, the flowers and the seed head. Uh, and also some additional information can also help. For example, what was the production setting that it was found? Is it a location that has normally problems with flooding? Uh, or it's always dry, it predominantly found in the shade, has any particular smell, things like that can always contribute for the proper identification. And then, so after you identify the weed, you can come up with some knowledge about weeds that can definitely help you to plan not only which
Morning glory.
control, no, that's field bindweed. So it can tell you not only which control methods to use, but the proper timing. So for example, just this picture here, field bindweed is a perennial with very deep root system. So if you try to control this one with, for example, some of the physical or mechanical control options, such as tillage, it's not very effective. Or for example, trying to control it with mowing, that will not give you too far in your, that will not be very successful. And then, and then when I think about the weed morphology, what matters for us when you are trying to identify which morphology is for planning your control method, is especially if you're planning to use chemical control or the use of herbicides, you need to know whether or not you're dealing with a grass, seed, rush, or broadleaf weeds, because we have different herbicide chemistries, groups of actions, sites of actions that they will act and be selective to some of, depending on the morphology that you are dealing. We have herbicides that will kill only the grasses. You have herbicides, our growth regulators, synthetic auxin herbicides that will be effective or active only on your broadleaf weeds. And you also have some herbicides such as glyphosate or commonly also trade name Roundup. It's a broad spectrum non-selective herbicide. So this one will kill all those different morphologies, as well as your desirable species, your desirable plant species. If you have something that is not glyphosate ready, but and then another important thing about the weed biology, think about developing an effective weed management program, it's the life cycle. So for example, is it an annual, is it a perennial, or is it a biannual? That will also tells you normally if you think about the use of a pre-emergence herbicide, you need to know the period that normally, what is the emergency window for that specific weed. Uh, and then also the time that it flowers. For example, we have some if most of the time when you are trying to control perennial weeds with systemic herbicides, it is recommended to apply when they are flowering. That's the case for field bindweed as well, because it will translocate the materials back down to the root system. So, and then also, when you think about the life cycle, and especially if you're talking about plants that rely heavily or solely on seed production for its spread, if we can target or plan our weed management method before seed production, if you can do that in a couple of years, and if you also know the seed longevity of that species, we can eventually eradicate that species from our production system. It's also important, like I mentioned, knowing the emergence flux window and flowering time of your plants, of your weeds, and then it's also important to know what is the seed longevity of this particular species. So because that's pretty much will tell you what is the amount of time that you need to have effective management, avoid that seed production that will eventually help you to get maybe not be completely rid of or eradicate, but decrease those infestation levels where it's not a threshold anymore. It's not a directly concern or directly reducing or causing problems. And then just one example on how all those informations can apply when we are planning which control method to use. If you think about, for example, mowing, uh, mowing tends to be better on animal species, on broadleaf weeds, and also plants that has upright growth habit. Because plants that are prostate, normally they are found below the blades. And for example, grasses, they have their growing points, sometimes even below ground. So if you think that you, for example, trying to control a perennial grass with mowing, it's probably going to be very difficult. And by the way, actually mowing is very species specific, and so it really depends the timing and the frequency that you need to mow. So even though it can be effective, it sometimes is just not very feasible because it requires multiple mowing events. But I just want to show that it's if that's the way you want to go, you really need to be able to identify the weeds that you have and see if mowing is the best one for them. But nonetheless, herbicides are very commonly used and do which they high efficacy and low cost, then that's totally fine if you want to use herbicides. Uh, just make sure that you are, and well, I will. There are some things to consider when you are deciding to use herbicides, and just make sure that don't rely on only herbicides. Make that one of your management options, not the only one. So if you do want to use herbicides, some of the basic principles that you really need to keep in mind is, like we mentioned, you need to know your weeds so we can choose the right herbicide for that particular weed. And you need to, so only you will know what is your needs and what is your necessities, how much land you have. So you need to match your equipment with your needs, which will vary from system to system. It can be very particular. And then it's very important to know how to calibrate your sprayer. And my original plan was to make a whole talk about calibrating your sprayer and then how to properly read and follow the label instructions. But the plan changed on the last minute. Maybe we can come up with a talk like that in the future if people think that's worth it. And also, guys, I don't want to take too much of your time, so I will just briefly go over just these three topics from now until the end of the presentation. Match your equipment for needs, some basic information about calibration and for different types of sprayers, and then how the importance of spraying at the proper time, especially if you're talking about post-emergency weed control. The as a rule of thumb, the lower and the younger should normally it's the better. So there are different types of setting or sprayer sets or sprayer equipments that one can choose. Now, it really there is no. I don't think that it's all of them. They have their particularities and the benefits and advantages and disadvantages. So it really depends on what are your needs and the amount of land that you have and but you can definitely use backpack sprayers. Probably it's going to be the cheapest one, but it's mainly, in my opinion, it works better if you're only trying to do very low spot treatment type of applications. If you do want to cover large areas, you need to go to with some source of boom and some type of spray that allows you to do broadcast over the top applications. And there are different ones. You do not even need to have a tractor. You can have those with UTVs and ATVs, and you can even build up a handheld boom herbicide sprayer if you want. And then calibration, it's very important. And the main reason for that is because when there is the proper dose or rate is key. Uh, I think that saying that says the difference between a medicine and poison is the dose. That definitely applies for chemical weed management. If you apply too much because didn't have a proper calibration, you are not even going off label, but you might cause injury to some of plants that you are not supposed to cause injury. And on the other hand, if you didn't have a proper calibration, you're spraying too low, you will not get the control that you should get. A couple of things to keep in mind: you need to have your proper and constant speed. It's very important to have the ideal height, the difference from your nozzles, from your spray boom, from the target widths, and I will talk more about the height in the next slide. And probably the nozzle, it's probably one of the cheapest parts of your sprayer, and in my opinion, one of the most important. So uh, there are different type of nozzles, different type of materials, but in general, they are color coded. So that means that you should always have the same color. All the nozzles in your boom should have the same color because that will dictate the gallons per minute or the output that you are delivering together with your speed and your pressure. And always make sure that all your nozzles are in good shape. You don't have any clogged nozzle in the boom that will change the spatter distribution and amount. And the different materials, you can have nozzles at different materials. There are some that are brass, some plastic. It's all about real get and metal. It's all about how much time they will last. But as long as you have the same GPM, same color coded nozzles in your boom, you can have all those different materials. It's up. That is not. They all will work. And just as a rule of thumb, the proper height. So if you're actually using a sprayer with a boom, just as a rule of thumb, the distance that you should be to the target width, not to the soil, to the average height of your target width, in in general is the same distance as the nozzles in your boom. So if you have, for example, 20 inch a boom with four nozzles and they are 20 inches apart, you should be around 18 to 20 inches above your target weed species. And then I have just a simulation here. So let's say this is the proper situation. You have your boom at the proper height. So all the nozzles, they need to overlap, 20 to 40% overlap. And then if you go here to the right and think about the distribution that we had, so was good, was uniform, and was the proper level. So what happens if you actually go up too high, too above the recommendation? Well, if you look here at this illustration that I made on the right, we are the distribution amongst all the four nozzles, it was still uniform. However, it was way lower the recommended dose or amount that we should be putting out. So what are the problems with that? We are probably not only going to have a lack of control, but one of the major problems, we need to be stewards of our neighbors. This will increase significantly the chance of off-target damage. And then on the other hand, what happens if we go too low or too below the proper application height? Well, now we are not getting the overlap that we should be getting across the nozzles. And if you look here in the illustration that I did again on the bottom right, we don't have a uniform distribution because we have strips that have not been applied. So we're definitely going to have a lack of control in those areas. And where we did cover, we actually ended up providing a way higher herbicide rate or amount that we should. So now we're definitely going to be having issues if you, let's say we are talking about broadly, if we talk about with control with in a site that we are using selective herbicide that was supposed to be selective to our desirable plant species. Now that we are above the recommended rate, there is a chance that might not be selective. And then, guys, just to wrap up, I apologize if I am going too fast. I think I was afraid that I was going to go over the time, especially being the last talk. But that was the only picture that was submitted to us for WIT ID. And if you think about the instructions of how to take pictures that I was just talking about, I think this person did a good job, even though probably some more close-ups on the seed head and on the leaf shape that would help. But after looking these pictures, I believe that we are talking about narrow leaf or showy milkweed. And I guess Julie, Teresa, if you guys want to just uh, chime in for regarding the management, maybe you guys, I'm pretty sure you guys have more knowledge than I. But it really depends on what are the goals of your situation. If you think that you have just a few weeds along the fence, and it's definitely not, harming your specific goals, I don't, and still the infestation is very low. I do not even know if employing management at this point it's necessary. This species is considered a kind of beneficial species if you think about the monarch butterfly. So, and then also if you have very low infestations, maybe you can control it without using herbicides, hand pulling or with the shovel. But if you do want to use herbicides, this book is very good, the weed control in natural areas in the Western United States. There are many other resources available online. And basically this weed report is from this book. And there are some options, but again, you really need to be careful, read the labels, make sure that those herbicides are labeled to use in your specific settings, in your situation. And I guess that's all that I had for you guys. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and I don't want to hold your dinner for too long.